Starting with the name of Allah, who is the most merciful and the most gracious. It's the presentation of CAM 453 presented to Dr. Javedia Shamshad, presented by Amna Hamid, roll number 43. The topic of my presentation is research process, its definition, its need, and the steps and components of the research process. First of all, what the research process is. It is the process of multiple scientific steps in conducting a research work. Each step is interlinked with the other step. Means research process is basically the stepwise sequence that we have to follow when we are performing our research. Each step is interlinked with the other step, means we have to follow the sequence. Means it starts with this research problem and then it goes on, and at the end we get a proper research result. Generally, a researcher conducts research work within the seven steps. There are seven steps for the research process to be conducted in a proper manner, and understanding of the research process is very necessary in order to effectively carry out the research and the sequencing of the stages inherent in the process. Research process is basically the part and parcel of the research proposal. That is the outline for our commitment that what we are intended to do, and in following executing the research study. All the steps that are involved in the research process are dependent on one another. Means we can't analyze data until we have collected the data, and we can't write the report until and unless we have analyzed the data. So we have to follow the sequence that the research process tells us. Means violation of the sequence can cause irreparable harm to the study. The research process can be compared with the route map. Means the very simple way, means we, in order to get a better understanding of what the research process is, means we follow a map in order to go to the specific destination. So in the same way we have to follow that specific route in order to get the proper result of a research. Choosing the best alternative in terms of time constraint, money, and human resources in our research decision is our primary goal. Mean, in the same way, we do some shortcuts in getting destination a much time earlier. So in the same way, we have some alternative routes, but we have to keep these factors in mind. Means these that will be time constraint, money, and human resources. Depending on that, we have to choose the best alternative. Now, coming to the stages in the research process, there are seven stages in the research process. First of all, we have to identify the problem, then we do literature review. After that, we formulate a hypothesis. Formulating hypothesis, after that, we choose a study design and then collect data. After collection of the data, we process it and analyze it. And after analyzing the data, we write a report at the end. Now, the detailed explanation of each step one by one. First step is identifying the problem. First and foremost task of the entire process of scientific research is basically to identify a research problem. So, means what we are going to do. Research problem is basically not a problem. It's the statement about an area of concern. It's the condition that we want to improve, and it's a difficulty that is to be eliminated, and that must exist in the scholarly literature or the theories. And a identified problem leads to a researcher to accomplish all important phases of the research process, starting from setting objectives to the selection of the research methodology. First of all, actually we have to identify the problem, that what we are going to do and what is the question that we will address. So that is basically identifying the problem. We have countless problems around us, and but all that we encounter do not qualify as a research problem. Thus we do not these do not need to be research. Means we have so many problems around us, but we have to choose that problem that is present in scholarly literature, and that needs to be identified and processed, that can be research. Means we can't identify a problem that do not needs to be research. After identification of the problem, we move to the reviewing the literature. Literature review is also an integral part of the research process. It basically enables the researcher to formulate the problem in terms of specific aspects of the general area of his interest that are not being for so far research. Means here we have to study that what are the unanswered question in that specific field, and means we have now identified the problem is identified. Now we are studying that what are the questions that are already answered in this regard, and what are the questions that are unanswered till now. So we have to cover all these aspects. Such a review not only provide exposure to the larger body of knowledge about that particular field, but also equip him with enhanced knowledge. It also equip the researcher about the enhanced knowledge of that particular field. Through a paper review of the literature, the researcher may develop the coherence between the results of his study and those of others. Obviously, when a person is doing a research in that particular field and get after getting a review of the literature from the previous literature, a person can get a coherence between the results of the previous studies and the study that someone is nowadays doing. If the researcher is aware of earlier studies of his topic or related topic, he will be in much better position to access the significance of his work and to convince others that it is important. Basically, it's also important, reviewing literature is also important in this regard, that when we study the literature, we get the importance, we get to know about the importance of that particular field. Means we get that how it is important, whether how it will benefit the other people. Reviewing the literature also helps us in these regards. It avoids the duplication of the work that has already been done in the recent past. So reviewing literature basically um, avoid duplication. It helps the researcher to find out what others have learned and reported on the problem. It helps the researcher to become familiar with the types of methodologies followed by the other in that particular field. It helps the researcher to understand what concepts and theories are relevant to the area of investigation. It also allows the researcher to understand if there are any unanswered research questions. It might help the researcher to develop an analytical framework. I mean, it helps the researcher to develop a proper layout, that in which layout a person should work, a researcher should work, because the previous literature is telling us that this is the layout that they have followed. So in that particular field, we should follow that layout also. After doing this, the step 3 is to formulate setting research question, objective, and hypothesis. This is basically some assumption. Hypothesis is also an assumption. After discovering and identifying the research problem, researcher should make a formal statement of the problem leading to the research objectives. Now we have a formal statement of a problem and having some objectives. So what we'll do in this regard? Objective will precisely say what should be researched, to delineate the type of the information that should be collected and provide a framework for the scope of the study. The best expression of the research objective is well formulated, testable research hypothesis. Means we have to formulate a proper hypothesis. We have to assume that what will do and what are the objectives, in which regard it will help the common man. Hypothesis is basically the unproven statement or proposition that can be refuted or supported by empirical data. After formulating hypothesis, we choose the study design. The fourth step is in research process is choosing the study design. It is basically the blueprint and the framework for fulfilling the objectives and answering the research question. It's basically the methods and procedures for collecting, processing, and analyzing the data. The four basic research designs are of survey, experiment, secondary data study, and observational study. Depending on these four design, we choose some design and then we follow that design in order to perform our research. After that, the next step is of collecting data. Gathering of data may range from simple observations to a large scale survey in any defined population. Some research have only small amount of data, some simple observations in them, and some research have large scale surveys of some defined population, some defined cities. The appropriate selected selection the approach sorry approach selected depends on the objectives of the study, research design, and availability of time, money, and personnel. These are the factors. Depending on that, we select some technique, some approach for collecting the data. With the variation, the type of data to be collected, the methods of data collection also varies. Obviously, the methods of data collection also varies according to the type. If we are qualitatively collecting data, we will do it differently, and if we want to collect data quantitatively, we apply some different techniques. The most common mean for collecting data is structured interview. Structured interview are called surveys. Qualitative data are collected mainly through in-depth interviews, focus group discussions, etc. The sixth step and the second last step is processing and analyzing data. After the data is collected by some techniques selected by us, we have to process the data. Data processing begins with the editing and coding of the data. Editing actually reduces the errors, it improves the legibility, and it clarifies the unclear and inappropriate responses, because it is also impractical to place raw data in the research, so we have to do some coding and make it manageable and is easily accessible to the person. This coding process facilitates processing the data. Data analysis usually involves reducing accumulated data to the manageable size, develop summaries, searching for patterns, and apply statistical techniques for understanding and interpreting the findings in the light of research question. It actually manage and rearrange the data according to the research question. After that, after processing and analyzing the data, we have to final step, writing the report. The entire task of the research study is accumulated in the document called the proposal. All the steps that we have performed earlier are to be done here, are to be written here. So in the entire document in which these all the steps were written, this is called proposal. The proposal will be prepared to keep in view the sequence presented in the research process. The proposal tell us what it tells us: what, how, where, and to whom it will be done. And to whom means the research will be done. It must also show the benefits of doing the research. It includes the explanation of the purpose of study. Research it systematically outlines the particular research methodology and detail the procedures that will be utilized at each stage of the research process. The end goal of the scientific study is to interpret the results and draw the conclusions. Now, if we will look at the summary of the research process. First of all, we have to identify the problem. Then we come to reviewing the literature. After that, we formulate the hypothesis. After formulating hypothesis, we choose a study design. Then we decide on the sample design. After that, we collect the data. After collection of the data, we have to process and analyze the data. And after analyzation, we write the report. That was all from my side. Thank you.